Hello and welcome to Channels Book Club. I'm Olapile Kasumo. I hope you are keeping safe and sticking to all the medical advice by experts on how to stay away from coronavirus. It's a very difficult time for the world. All over the world, there is something close to a shutdown of movements and services and so many other things. We pray that this thing will roll over very quickly. But it's a great time to also do so many wonderful things. Relate with family and your children, for those who are married, wives, husbands, and so many other things. Communicate better with them. And also to pick up any of those books that you always procrastinated that you will read. Those books on your bookshelf that you said for a long time, I'll read, but I'm too busy to read. Now you can have time to read. The bookshops are closed, so unfortunately, we can't walk into a bookshop right now, any bookshop right now, to pick up books. But online bookstores are recording as high as 400% increase in sales. So you can go to any of the big online retail bookshops, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Nook, and the rest of them, and buy a book that you've always wanted to read. If you have an iPad, or you have a Kindle, or you have your phone or your laptop, you can always go to any of the big online bookstores and buy a book you've always wanted to read. But let's take you away from Corona today. Our guest today is a fascinating lady who unfortunately had a tragic experience. She lost her husband unexpectedly, and that brought about so many bad experiences based on culture and traditions that you find in Africa. She went ahead to write her story in a memoir titled Not This Widow. Her name is Dilys Sillah. It's a touching, moving book. When I started reading it, I just couldn't drop it, and our chat with her was really moving. But let me allow her to introduce herself, read a bit from her book, and then we'll show you the chat that we had with her. Enjoy this.
My name is Dilys Sillah. I'm a life coach and author of the book, Not This Widow. This book was inspired by the sudden loss of my husband, and also me being so amazed at how people reacted to those that are grieving and how people responded to widows and widowhood. I'm about to read an excerpt from the book, Chapter 9, Over the Rainbow, of Not This Widow. I'd been waiting for that call since I lost Eddie. He had passed away suddenly, so the coroner had to be involved. I was upset because the day Eddie died, they'd said I could see him any time I wanted to. However, I hadn't seen him for nearly a month. 2 days before his funeral. It was the longest time we had been apart since we married. I had been longing to see him for so long I could hardly sleep. When that call came through, meaning that I would get to see Eddie and talk to him and just be with him, I felt a little comfort in my heart. My 2 friends who had been visiting almost daily accompanied me. They walked through the doors of the funeral home, but instead of taking a left and sitting in the welcoming waiting area with a hot cup of tea, I was asked to follow the lovely lady in charge to a tiny chapel outside the main building. I went in with one of my friends because she thought I might need the support, but would leave if I needed time alone. Eddie was in a small room, the third on the right if my memory serves me correctly. I opened the door slowly, took a deep breath and walked inside with my friend in tow. She gently closed the door behind me. I looked down into this beautiful shiny coffin my husband lay in the clothes I had so carefully chosen for him. The lady commented on how stylish my husband must have been, being most impressed with his psychedelic socks when I had taken his clothes to her a few days before. I had proudly proceeded to tell her what an impeccable man my husband was, how he always smelt divine. Now here he was, lifeless. I looked into the coffin and nearly collapsed on seeing him. If it weren't for a pair of very quick outstretched hands that broke my fall, I would have been in a heap on the floor. I couldn't breathe properly. My chest hurt, and I felt cheated. The man lying there wasn't my husband. It just wasn't him. He looked like him somewhat, But that wasn't my husband. My husband had gone. He had gone before I could really say goodbye. That's not him. That's not Eddie. I'm not coming back here again. I don't want to see him. That's not Eddie, I managed to say between my sobs. I was in such a highly distressed state that I was ushered out of the room and straight to the waiting car. I sat in the front seat and stared out of the window for the entire 30-minute journey back home, not saying a single word. Something happened to me when I walked into that room, something I hadn't expected. Whatever it was, though, that something helped me immensely in preparation for my husband's funeral. The day I lost Eddie, I sat with him in the hospital for hours. I held his hand, I kissed his face, I rubbed his head, I ran my hands over his chest, I laid my head on his chest. I took in everything that I possibly could so I wouldn't forget what he felt like. I consciously savoured and stored those feelings in my soul so I would remember. And when I needed to, I could go back to that place. I took in the smile he had on his face, so peaceful and so gentle and so handsome. I took it all in. This was not the man I had just seen, and therefore I was able, after processing that painful encounter, to accept that my husband was no more. It didn't take much to tell me that I was so fortunate to have seen him before the funeral. Why? Because if the man I saw was the smiling, warm, and peaceful man I had sat beside for hours and hours asking why he had left me so suddenly at the hospital on the day he passed away, I wouldn't have been able to bury him. I know without a shadow of a doubt I wouldn't have been able to go through with it. Somehow I felt a disconnect, and the reality of Eddie being gone and me being on my own was stark. It hit me between the eyes in a way that denial was not possible. We were very close. He was so alive. He was so present. The contrast of what was and what is was just too great for me to remain in a state of shock or indeed denial. I had 2 children that had lost their father, and I couldn't allow them to feel for a minute that the roles had been reversed and that they were responsible for me. So this strength everyone spoke about had to be used to support my children. At the very least, I had to make sure that on the day I didn't crumble. I had to reach so far within myself to be a pillar for them to lean on. I was now so eager for the day to come so I could get it over with. For the next 2 days, I held my breath and focused on that fact that if we got through it, then I could exhale.
It's great to be here with you, Dilly. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Not This Widow, a journey of grief, love, loss, strength, and survival. Very moving, very touching story, really. What inspired this?
I think, to be honest, I didn't set out to write a book. I lost my husband. I assumed that after every loss, people grieve. That was the level of my naivety. What I experienced was that after loss, you see a side of human nature that's quite disturbing. And you find yourself in a place of victimization, judgment, abuse, bullying, that you never, you don't ever anticipate. So my experience after I lost my husband, very, very quickly after I lost him, I would say within the first 48 hours, the in-laws became, as I termed them in the book, outlaws. And, the behavior and the accusations was just unbelievable. So as I started to speak about my experience, because I am quite a vocal person, I found that my experience wasn't unique. And I couldn't understand why other women hadn't spoken up, that now it was considered to be part of the norm. I mean, considering that my husband and I lived in England, I'm originally from Ghana and he was from Sierra Leone, you would have thought that, living abroad, you wouldn't have these kind of problems. But I think the only difference was that they couldn't storm into the house and loot the place, which is not normally what happens, back home. So that was why I felt that not only did we need to speak about the culture, but also understanding what grief does to people and the level and kind of support that people who are grieving, that they actually need. So that was the motivation for writing it.
This is a memoir that primarily tells the story of how you lost your husband and the disheartening experiences you had after then. But it's also a story of love, of relationships, of parenting, of family, and so many other things, isn't it?
So the book is about hope. The book is about looking at your future that a lot of young people will plan. I'm going to get married, going to have kids, going to live happily ever after. What do you do when that doesn't happen? What do you do when you, as I said, see a side of human nature that you didn't know existed? Because it tests what's in you. Because the one thing that I've learnt is that I am resilient. I think it will open people's eyes to, as I said, what they have inside of them. And I think it will make people think more about the words that they say even to people who are grieving, so that they can be more supportive. And it's funny because there's a phrase that I really don't like at all, which is, "it is well." I hate it with a burning passion, can't stand it. I find it's very flippant, it's very patronizing, because it's not well. And there were people that would defend making that statement until they had lost someone, and then they understood. So I think what this book provides is it provides, putting you in my shoes and takes you on a journey that you can actually feel as if you were me. And I think that is something that is what I had hoped to achieve in this book, to open people's eyes to what the world is really like.
For viewers out there who are not familiar with the story, can you tell the story? Of course, there are a lot of things I'm sure you want to leave out, but let's provide teasers. Tell the story of this book. What's in here?
So the story starts very much looking at me as a person, looking at my husband, how we were as a couple, because I felt that it would be really helpful to give a real context of the type of relationship that we had, in order for you to understand the impact of what I went through. I talk about the fact that, we got married like every other normal couple, had children, and my husband falls ill unexpectedly. This is a man that would boast about the fact that, I'm X number of years old and I've never spent one night in hospital, I've never been ill, which was true. But we went on holiday for the summer in Portugal. It's somewhere where we'd been a couple of times. And day 4 into our 2-week holiday, my husband falls ill with a suspected stroke. But only it wasn't a stroke. But even with what was diagnosed, the prognosis was quite positive that, he'd be back home in 5 days. Well, those 5 days never came. We were in Portugal for a long time. My husband was hospitalized for 6 months in total. And things just went downhill after that. However, my husband passed away suddenly after, a minor procedure, which we all believed was the last leg of this long stretch of, bad luck in terms of his health. So it was dealing with the suddenness of his passing. That was difficult.
You also tell the stories of 3 other widows in this book. Why this style?
I think it's going to be a bit of a theme, because this is actually my second book, and I do something similar in my first book. But why I shared these women's stories was because I realized that there was a very common thread in how we treat people who are grieving, whether they're widows, whoever. And it wasn't just a cultural thing. The only difference that I found with, black women, as opposed to any other group of women, is that we killed our husbands. No African man ever dies. The wife must have killed him, because clearly we would want to bring up our children on our own. We would want to sleep alone. We would want to grow old alone, because again, the culture does not encourage us to enter into another relationship or remarry. And I challenge all of those things. But that was where I felt that it was important to share these stories and give them a voice, because some of these women had never been able to speak. And for me, it's very important that women are empowered to speak, because the silence is what perpetuates the problem, which is what I found. I mean, my shock was that, so this is, I'm not unique. So this is how women are treated when their husbands die. Why haven't you said anything? Why hasn't anyone spoken up? And I decided to be that person that would speak up and challenge this and say, this is wrong. You have no right to do this.
Can you share one or two experiences you narrated in this book that you had after you lost your husband that shocked you into writing this book?
I think there were two things that really shocked me. The first was the speed with which these vultures came out. I just couldn't believe that within 48 hours of, this is not as if, my husband was terminally ill, that it was expected. This is somebody that was, gone to bed one night and the following morning within, I don't know, half an hour was gone. It shocked me at how callous they were. I mean, if you put it into the context that I'm the wife, so I must have killed my husband, somebody that tended to him for nearly 4 years and looked after him, people weren't even aware that my husband was still ill. And they that did nothing and showed no real emotion, that shocked me. What I think was the catalyst for me to say, right, I'm going to write this book, was a cousin of my husband sent me a text message instructing me on how I should conduct my husband's funeral, that I had no right to ban certain family members, which I did, and it's in the book. That part is too juicy for me to share. I banned a couple of people from the funeral. And she then said to me that I was to produce documentation, lasting power of attorney, to prove to her and the rest of the family that I had the right to bury my husband as I chose, and that she demanded that I must respond by the end of the day. Now, anyone that knows me knows that that was not smart. And when I really did respond, not this widow.
How did you feel realizing that your experience is widespread in Africa, particularly with your encounter with the stories of the 3 other women you shared in your book?
I think at that point I wasn't shocked per se, the fact that there were others like me, but it was the different variations, like, one of the ladies, and she's young, her losing her husband, excuse me, so quickly, and finding out that she was pregnant, and then the family denying that's not his child. I think what shocked me was the different levels of pure evil and wickedness that was exhibited. And though there were 3 stories in there of widows, there was one from a child of a widow, because I thought it was very important to tell this story from a child's perspective. Because I remember my kids saying to me, "Mum, we can't grieve because of what they're doing to you." And that's when I said, enough's enough. I've made that decision that you're not coming to the funeral, you're not coming, and you're not coming, if you do not give me my due respect as the wife. Not the girlfriend, not the baby's mother, as the wife. And I said, if for nothing else, I looked after your brother, your cousin, your whoever, for nearly 4 years with no help, and I didn't need it. Not even the prayers, because I took on that responsibility as the wife. So it was really the level of ingratitude and disrespect that I saw as a common trend, that I thought, this has got to stop. And one has got to stand up. You see, we don't really stand up for ourselves, especially as African women, and that needs to stop as well.
Why is the problem of mistreatment of widows rampant in Africa?
I think the problem is a very, male-dominated society. And women have always been taught that marriage is so important to us. We are so disrespectful to women who are not married or women who do not have children, as if, producing children is what defines you as a woman, because it's not. And I thank God that, you know, on my social media, and I do a lot of work with, you know, around relationships, I always used to flash my ring and say that this does not define me. And thank God it didn't, because now that my husband is not here, where would I be? I would not be me. And what I resented was, it's like people forget your name. So I ceased to be Dilys. I was the woman that lost her husband, the widow. No. So I think it's because of the way we have also been preconditioned as women, not just in the African society. If you look in the Western culture, you look at even these fairy stories of Cinderella and Snow White and Rapunzel. It's always this prince that's coming to rescue this, you know, damsel in distress. But if you look at it, as women, we are very powerful. You know, we could probably solve the world's problems if we were given a chance. You know, we are very powerful. But we have been taught that, you know, it's not even necessary to educate a woman. You know, we have to start to make our voices heard, because nobody's going to do it for us.
If you were to offer one advice to anyone who encounters a widow, a newly widowed woman, if I may use that expression, in Africa, particularly a young widow, what will that advice be?
I think be compassionate and respect the fact that she lost her husband, not her mind. Therefore, she is still perfectly capable to be able to make decisions about her life and her future, whichever way she wants it to go. Because what I found most patronizing was being told what to do, what to feel, when to feel it, how to feel it. I'm like, hold up, wait a minute. I'm still an adult, a fully grown woman. I lost my husband, not my faculties. Stop telling me what to do. So I think the single most important thing is respect the fact that she's not just the widow. She is a woman who happened to have lost her husband, not somebody that lost her husband and happens to be a woman.
Dilys, thank you very much for joining us. It's been a pleasure having this conversation with you.
Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that interview. Very moving experience there that Dilys had. Well, you can see me wearing a face mask. This is one of the things that people are using all over the world to protect themselves. We need to stay very safe. Stay away from coronavirus. Keep yourself safe. Protect yourself and your family. Very useful. Right here, they are out of stock all over now. I was reading somewhere that France ordered like 1 billion from China. China is the biggest manufacturer of face masks and hand gloves. These are very useful things, but they're largely out of stock. But whatever it is, we need them to, when you touch anything, and this is a hand sanitizer here, when you touch anything or just use water. Water is good enough. Make sure you wash your hands all the time. Hey, I'm not a medical expert, but these are things that medical experts have recommended. Let's make sure that we listen to the experts, those who know. A lot of things are flying out there on social media, but let's stick to what the experts are saying. Protect yourself and stay very safe. As always, we'll be delighted to get your feedback through any of our social media platforms displayed on your screen. I'm Olakune Kasumo. Remember, one great book can change your life. Bye-bye.